Welcome back. In 1998, National's then Energy Minister Max Bradford embarked on a controversial reform of our electricity market. The old ECNZ was split into separate lines and energy companies. And it's those reforms that Labor and the Greens say have failed. Max Bradford joins me now from Taupo. Good morning, Mr Bradford. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Rachel.
Have your reforms failed, as Labor and the Greens accuse them of?
No. When the competitive market was allowed to work, prices fell. And between 1998 and 2002, before Labor started fiddling with the market, prices did fall. So if you let the competitive market work, then prices will either rise more slowly than otherwise they would, or they fall.
We've just had a look at that graph actually too, Mr Bradford, that you've referenced to, which show what happened in the wake of your reforms. Will the Labor Greens plan do then what it's designed to do, which is, in essence, lower power prices?
Well, there's one simple reason why the promise of $300 per power consumer will happen, and that's because Mr Shearer is proposing to give back all the dividends and the tax that the companies give to the government, and that works out to be about $300 per consumer. So that's pretty obvious. When you're giving a subsidy from the taxpayer, then prices will fall, at least in the first instance. But overall they won't, because the proposals that Labor and the Greens are putting forward will actually increase the cost base of the industry probably quite substantially when you get a monopoly buyer, as they're proposing.
So you're suggesting that it will have an impact on consumers' pockets in the short term, but not in the long term?
Yeah, it'll only happen, the prices will only fall because they're giving taxpayers dollars back. And as you made the point earlier in the program, the government's going to have to find the money that they give back to power consumers from other sources in order to meet the shortfall. So nobody's really better off, and I don't understand how Labor and the Greens can pretend that this is a good thing for either taxpayers or consumers. Do
you agree with or accept what David Parker says when he says the cost or the net cost of all of this will only be around 90 million?
No, I don't. I mean, you only need to look at their first major intervention into the electricity market in 2002, when they established the Electricity Commission, that the costs rose substantially. They had a lot of bureaucrats arguing over whether power companies should or should not be able to build generation stations, and the net result was that costs went through the roof. And that's the sort of thing you can expect from the proposals that Labor's putting forward now.
OK, what do you make then of the proposals that we've just spoken with Winston Peters? What do you make of the proposals that he's suggesting?
Well, the irony is David Parker studied the single power purchase proposal, New Zealand power purchase proposal, and I think it was in 2003. And after his officials examined it and he examined it, he tossed it out, as it has in most parts of the world. I mean, the Greens, I think, have quoted Canada as being an example of where this has worked. Well, the only state or province in Canada that's using it is Ontario, and the first chief executive of the organisation that was established to do this is now saying they created a Frankenstein. So it hasn't worked there. By and large, these sorts of things don't work in other countries, and when you look around, where competitive markets have been established, power prices have either fallen or have risen much, much more slowly than they would in a controlled market. OK, so what is it then that makes our power prices among the most expensive in the OECD? Well, firstly, ours aren't, but what causes them to rise are usually things that are either within the government control, such as policies. One of the policies that Labor introduced after 2002, just before prices exploded, was to put a moratorium on the establishment or building of cheap thermal generation power stations. That meant that we had to go to renewable power, such as wind power, which is very expensive. So those sorts of government policy decisions help. One of the other things that happened subsequent to 2002 was we ran out of cheap gas. The Maui gas field, the gas from the Maui gas field was replaced with much higher cost natural gas that had to be used by the electricity suppliers, and that was an increased cost of production to them. So there are a mix of reasons, some of which are Labor government or government policy decisions, others are that the primary cost of energy rises. And so when you study all of these things, there are good explanations why power prices have risen, but the best way to keep them as low as possible is to allow a competitive market to operate.
So if you had to bring power prices down, what would you do? Could you?
Well, what I would do is I would firstly remove the power metering systems from the generators and put them in the hands of either independent companies or back to the lines companies, so that we could push very strongly for smart meters. Secondly, I'd change the pricing mechanism for electricity so that consumers could get the prices that they were paying to be reflected when they use the power. Prices go up and down in the wholesale market. That ought to be available as an option for consumers. And the third thing that I would do is really to remove the constraints on the competitive market from operating, not put too much bureaucracy in the way of the companies being allowed to operate in the competitive wholesale market, and make sure those lower costs and prices are reflected in the prices that consumers pay. Look, it works all over the world in other markets. Who would now talk about going back to a single monopoly-owned telecoms company or an airline company in New Zealand? That's what needs to happen in electricity. The sooner it happens, the better, frankly.
All right, former National Energy Minister Max Bradford, thank you for your time this morning.